Today we're going to do a Kitchener stitch, or it's also called grafting, and you're grafting live stitches to live stitches. You do this with the toes of socks, or sometimes you'll do them, say you cut off the ribbing on your sweater and you need to put new ribbing on, you'd use a Kitchener stitch to rejoin those two pieces. You can also use it for fixing holes. There's a lot of things you can use it for. But basically what it does is it takes two sides of a garment where the stitches are facing in two opposite directions and joins them. So I have this sitting on my little June Taylor mat because I can pin everything down and make it very clear so you can see it very clearly. So I have done used a really big needle to knit these swatches, a 10.5 on with worsted weight yarn, so that you could really see how the stitches are lining up and how yarn travels. So as we're looking at this orange swatch, you can see here's the front leg of the stitch, and it's connected with this little bit of yarn to the next stitch where it's connected to the back. Here's the front leg of the stitch. It's connected to the back leg of the stitch. And it's the same here on this side. And here's that little traveling bit of yarn. What we're going to do is we're going to make our yarn travel like that between these two pieces so that our fronts and our backs line up and you can't tell which is which. And I've knit one in green and one in orange, so it's very clear what we're doing. And we're going to start by putting our needle in. I don't really say putting it in as if to knit or as if to purl because it's very confusing for me that way. What we're looking at here would be, it's knit flat, but we could also envision it being the toe of a sock where the back of this, if it was a sock, like this sock, the back of the work is actually the middle. So see, here's the back side of stockinette, here's the front side of stockinette. So the back of a sock is the middle of a sock. So when I refer to the back, we're going to really be talking about the middle. I know that's a little bit mind-boggling, but when you think about it, think of your t-shirt that you're wearing. When it's inside out, you're actually having the middle on the outside. So it's the same kind of idea. So first we're going to thread a long needle. This is worsted weight white yarn, so it will really show up. So we're going to start by going into the back from the back. So see how these stitches are sort of lining up on the needle. We're going to make our stitches come we're going to make our yarn come into the stitch like the stitch comes in. The yarn comes into a stitch, and the yarn comes in like a bump and comes in and out. So we're going to go in from the back and see how that's sort of lining up with the way a stitch will come in. And then we're going to go into the front. We're calling this the front. You can do the same thing. So see how this yarn here is attached, is coming in to the stitch in this direction. We need to do the same thing with our needle. We're going to go in to see how this is mimicking that. See how this mimics that. Then we have to go back to the back again because we're just starting this up. And now this one, the yarn we're working with came out of the middle of the stitch, so we need to go in the way the yarn came out. But now we're in the back. Our yarn is in the back, needle's in the back, so we're going to go into the next needle stitch from the back, pull the first stitch off, and pull our yarn through. Now, I tend to be really kind of on the looser side with my Kitchener right off because I want to be able to adjust my stitches later. So now this stitch, when we look at that, the yarn here came out and over, so now we're going to go in from the front, and again, our needle's in the back of the work, so we're going to go in from the back to the next stitch over, and see how this little line is mimicking this little line between the stitches. So now we're going to go back to the back. This one came out of the front of the stitch, so we're going to go into the front, out of the back, and then in through the back to the next stitch. Pull this stitch off. Now I'm going to speed up a tiny bit so that you can see what's going on. So I just want you to watch in the front to the back, back to front. Now we're going to the back piece, in from the front, out the back, in the back, out the front. In the front, out the back, in the back, out the front. In the front, out the back, in the back, out the front. In the front, out the back, in the back, out the front. So it's kind of always going to be that same thing. And you see how they're starting to look like they're connected. So once you get started on a stockinette stitch garter, I mean a stockinette stitch Kitchener stitch, woof, the swatch is in stockinette. The Kitchener is in stockinette. You're always going to follow that same pattern in the front and the back. So if it comes in from the front, it goes out of the back, and then out, back, and front. So it's always front, back, back, front. So here we're going to go front, back, back, front. So the only real trick is getting set up. But then after you get the pattern in front, out, back, back, front, out, front, once you get that pattern sort of settled in your mind, the Kitchener stitch starts to be a little less daunting. I find the directions that say do it as if to knit, do it as if to purl very confusing because I don't have a knitting needle. I have a sewing needle. And for me, I just like to see how the yarn is traveling. And it's always traveling where it's making that, and you can see this right here, that's that little strand between the stitches. We're just mimicking that strand between the stitches. That's how we're making this graft work. I'm going to snug these up a tiny bit. So the Kitchener stitch was developed or invented by Lord Kitchener, who was a real guy. He developed it because socks for the military had a seam in them and they were sort of uncomfortable in boots. So he wanted to figure out a way to make a seamless toe. And so he became Lord Kitchener based on this, just like cardigan sweaters are named after Lord Cardigan. I know, it's hard to believe that that's a real person, but it was, and if I can find a picture of him, I'll add him to this video so that you can see him, because in his glory is sort of interesting and fun. There was a time when we hand knit wool socks for the military because, as you know, wool stays warm even when it's wet. And it stays buoyant. It also doesn't really burn. You can burn it. It's like hair burning. It's made out of the same thing as hair. But it also self-extinguishes, so it's especially good for those military guys or people who are working around something flammable things because it keeps them from burning. So as you're looking at this, see how the yarn is traveling, just like the row below it, and it's just mimicking, making those stitches look like they were always connected. It's sort of magical. I really love the Kitchener stitch. It can be a little bit tricky because you can do it in garter, or you can do it on the purl side. I like to do my Kitchener from the knit side of stockinette. It's just a little bit easier for me to see. I dropped a bunch of needle stitches off the needle. Nothing to be worried about, I promise. And you would not pin your item down like this. This is just for display. I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. It wouldn't be the norm to pin things down. It's just I just did it so it would be really easy for you to see. I also used 2 colors so that it would be obvious where we did that grafting. I did use the same weight of yarn and the same number of stitches because that's kind of key in making these things all work out correctly. But when you notice, when we get to the end, we are actually a half a stitch off because of the way stitches work. So we just graft it together. So let's pull these up a little bit. They need to be a little bit snugger. And I know it's not St. Patty's Day, and these are the colors of the Irish flag, but really we're closer to Thanksgiving. So there's that, but you know. So see, as I snug these stitches up, if we were using the same color, they just drift away and you can't even tell what happened. You want to be a little bit consistent with your gauge, so you have to read your gauge. Just look at it, use a discerning eye, sort of like, I don't know. Oh, I know. You should be looking at it like you do when somebody hits you with their car or their cart. You're like, did you leave a dent? You want to look at it with that kind of filter so that everything looks good and even. And there you have it, all snugged up, Kitchener stitch. Thanks for watching.